Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Sisto Says, powered by Design 2147, a New York City building and code consulting firm. And I'm privileged again to have Richard Lobel.
Good to be here.
Back. How you doing, Richard?
Very well, thanks, Sisto.
So, got a guest there's a lot happening in your world, young man. Mm-hmm. A lot happening.
I was at community boards every night this week. So it's been a pretty heady time.
Well, go back in time, right? You were here last year.
Sure.
And we talked about a lot of things. And the main thing we talked about was the city of Yes and the proposed changes that Mayor Adams and city planning and everybody, because it's not just them, it's community boards. It's,
sure.
And the power of the community board, of what the community board wants to see in their district and, what their vision is. And a long time ago, I learned from your dad that, zoning is about being a visionary, to understand the needs of the city today and understand, where we are now and where we're going to go. So, part of what we're going to talk about today is, use groups, who's making, paper bags in New York City,
Sure.
but it was a very specific thing. Manufacturing of shoes, right? And they were very, very specific.
Right.
And now the city has this proposal out about changing the use groups and allowing more opportunity for things to happen in certain communities that were not available. And, one of my biggest pet peeves is a good friend of mine. He owned a funeral home and their lease ran out. And if you go, I've looked at probably a half a dozen spaces for him, and they are in great neighborhoods where the neighborhood needs people to walk there.
Sure.
Or drive there. And we can't find a space for him because one of the requirements is when we go and we want to change the use to a funeral home, they need a loading berth.
Right.
And we only want to rent 1,000 square feet.
Right.
We want a 20 by 50 storefront for us to have a funeral parlor.
Right.
But we can't because, A, we can't put in a loading berth because can't put it in the middle of the street. 2, the zoning says if you're going to do it, you have to do it. So there's a lot of antiquated things from the 1960s
Sure.
that are still around. Yeah, there's a lot of amendments, but there hasn't really been a whole overview.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about the overview that's going on right now, and that is going to probably get ratified, what's the right word, by the end of the year.
So that's really a good example with the funeral home, because when you take a look at our zoning in the city of New York, you're looking at a zoning resolution which, like you said, although amended, was set in 1961. And I think until this time, like we've also talked about, you have this body of law, really, which has carried us through the last 60 years. And so City of Yes, which has been adopted already in terms of the first 2 sections,
Right.
Environmental sustainability and economic development.
Right, now we're
in housing opportunity, the big enchilada.
Right.
So, so what does it really mean for everyone? So I think there's the good and the bad. The good is that there's a little bit more specificity now on things like use groups. And so, whereas before you dealt with a zoning resolution which was written so long ago that it didn't contemplate a lot of uses that are now the case in 2023, 2024.
electric charging spaces for bikes.
Charging, 3D printing, different amusement uses, indoor skydiving. So you really had to go to DOB and really had to suss this out. So now there's
city planning.
So now there's an attempt, I think, to expand and to allow for more flexibility. And even though the good part, like we talked about, is that you'll have an easier time finding your use group.
Right.
The bad part, of course, is that you're now dealing. You take a look at economic development. You're dealing with over 1,100 pages of a zoning text amendment, which is just. You look at the text of one amendment or 2 pages, and it's a lot to go through.
It gives you a headache just reading it.
And so now you're really in a point where, people ask me whether or not City of Yes is going to reduce the amount of work generally in the industry and particularly for land use and zoning attorneys. There's no chance. There's so much there, and there's so many challenges that this are going to pose in terms of just changing your C of O.
Well, the thing, right. So the thing that always I talk about, when these things happen is 5 different people could read the same sentence and take away, yet when they write it, they think it's so clear.
Right.
And that's why people like yourself, people like our firm, we may not know, but part of our job is to understand it. But the most important part of it is, what was the intent and how will they interpret it?
Right.
They being whoever, the building department, city planning, BSA, whoever it might be. So my take on it was, again, I haven't deep dived into it, but my take on it was that they created some new uses. They got rid of some of the antiquated uses. But one of the examples that I gave on the previous show was, if you took and I just looked at one the other day. I looked at a CO from 1968.
Right.
And the CO basically listed every single use in the cellar. And if you wanted to take the soil linen closet that they used for garbage disposal or whatever, and you want to make it a little office,
Right.
got to file a whole new C of O
Yeah,
because
that's
they were
insane.
so specific.
Right.
And when you go to the building department, nope, you got to file an alt CO.
Right.
And you're saying to yourself, but it's a $10,000 job. They're going to put some doors, they're going to put a window up, new ceilings, they're going to paint it, and they're going to drop a desk in for the management
Right.
agent to have an office. You got to go get a whole new C of O.
Yeah. And it's interesting to hear the problems that you encounter versus the problems that we encounter.
Right.
So what do people come to us for? And I think some of the City of Yes proposals really hit the nail on the head. So, for example, prior to the most recent adoption of the text amendment, you had M11 to M16 zoning districts. The floor area was limited in terms of what you could get: M11, a 1 FAR, M122, M1, M13, 5, and so on, with varying parking requirements. And I think the city, so what they've done in their economic text amendment was to create a whole new toolbox in terms of M11A through M19A, M21A through M24A. And the idea here is it's going to lead to better and more commercial and industrial uses.
Wow.
So what they've really kind of encouraged people to do is, so now, for example, if you are building pursuant to an M1 3A zoning district, you'll get an FAR, which will be for other uses, and then you'll get an FAR for qualifying uses. And so it's essentially incentivizing you to basically
take the bigger bonus.
Correct. So now, and
Which
also
makes sense.
Absolutely.
Because before it was, here's your block, this is all you could put in it.
Correct.
That's it.
Correct.
And if you want more, go to BSA.
That's it. And also, a lot of the rezoning work that we do, because most of our work now, probably most of it 10 or 15, 20 years ago would be at BSA, and now most of it it's at city planning. Because people have a site, they want to impose a development on the site,
Sure.
They want more flexibility. So until literally this text amendment passed a few months ago, you go in for your application and you're like, okay, you've got an M11 or an M12, you're going up to an M15.
Right.
And so what were the big problems with that? Number one, you've got a 5 FAR for floor area ratio for manufacturing commercial, a 6.5 for community facility. Maybe you didn't need all that FAR. Maybe
Right.
you wanted something more as in terms of a 3 or a 4. You didn't have the opportunity to do that.
Right.
And the other thing, of course, is that now that you've got qualified uses, you now have a system where
They're promoting it.
correct. You don't have to negotiate out.
Correct.
I'm now.
If you want a warehouse and the logistics in an M, you could max it.
correct. And
So
it's-
and the developers will feel more in tune to develop that site versus leaving it vacant.
makes them more attuned to what is actually needed on the site, what they have to do, and also prevents more of this ad hoc negotiation. I'm currently, I have rezonings right now where we end up negotiating and entering into restrictive declarations on how much commercial you're going to have and how much manufacturing you're going to have, when now it's easier to write it into the zoning. So I think that, Sisto, when we're looking at it as basics,
Do you think, though,
that's the good part.
Do you think that, in terms of the good part, do you think that there'll be more as of right manufacturing buildings versus this repurposing of the existing sites?
I don't. I think that the City of Yes gives you the tools, And now people are going to have to take advantage of that either privately, or they're going to have to take advantage of that through the city, through area-wide rezonings. So they create these great tools in terms of higher FARs, or specifically FARs which relate to specific uses and industrial uses, lower to no parking requirements, which is also a huge thing.
Correct.
But you have to zone it, and you have to impose that zoning district. So now, for all of these M11 and M12 zoning districts,
Now it's got to go to the community boards.
now it's got to go through ULURP. It's basically people, and like
And how long do you think that's going to take? Several years?
we get those applications now.
But I'm saying for citywide, for those
I
areas
think
in the M's.
Well, it's basically area-wide rezonings also always take a long time, and then we get to kind of one of the other things to talk about here, which is what are the city's priorities. There's a reason they started with environmental sustainability and then went to economic growth, and the reason they did that was because they knew that housing opportunity was going to be the hardest.
Right.
Because we go to community boards regularly and with all types of applications. If you're bringing jobs in through manufacturing rezonings and upzonings, you can walk out of a community board with everyone feeling great about that because people want to see jobs where people live.
Right.
But now you introduce housing, affordable housing, more units, need for additional school seats, questions about infrastructure.
Right.
And those residential rezonings are going to, specifically
They have more impact.
More impact, and so I think that those changes, the city's really going to try to go for its residential changes and residential rezonings before they touch a lot of the manufacturing.
It's funny that you bring that up because it's funny to me because I think of these things when I'm driving and I think of topics for this show. And I just met with my partners and we were talking about forecasting work for the future and where is the city at,
Right.
What are we doing, and you made a perfect example of 10 years ago you and Dad and your whole staff were doing a ton of BSA cases, and now you're doing more CPC work.
Correct.
And if you would have said back then, oh my God, the BSA work will dry up and we're going to be doing city planning, somebody would look at you and say, what are you talking about?
Right.
This is the crux of your business.
Right.
And when I look at these things, the 421A died and we knew it was bad. All the developers we talked to, everybody said, this is not good. We're not going to partner with the city if there's no program, so we're not going to build it.
Right.
And then we wait and we wait and we wait and we wait 2 full years, and the 485X comes out.
Right.
And Dom and Serge are like, yeah, it's coming. I said, guys, pump the brakes.
Right.
Because until developers really dig into this and understand that this is a real partnership between the private side and the government side,
Right.
and both parties can benefit from it, then it'll be a success.
Right.
If it is one-sided, and I don't mean it in any other way,
Right.
if it's too good for the private equity, we'll be busy, but then the government will stop it. And if it's too good for the government, the private side won't build it.
Sadly, I think right now it's too good for the government.
And unfortunately, the reason why I say that is because we always gauge everything on our RFPs, right? And I'm sure you go to the office and say, when you have your meetings with your staff, so guys, we just got 10 new cases. Well, 9 of them are city planning and one's a BSA, right? On the flip side, in our office, we say, well, how many new buildings? And the new buildings we get are community facilities.
Oh, wow.
The new buildings we get are condos. The new buildings we get are on the education side, colleges, nursing homes, institutions, things like that. But in terms, and 100% affordable, the jobs we're on
Right.
together.
Correct.
For Fifth Avenue Committee, for Bridge, for
Right.
all of those non-for-profits that build true 100% affordable housing, 100% financed by the government, whether it's New York State or the federal government, somehow they're getting grants to build these buildings. But in the private market, from the private side, it's just not there yet.
It is a massive problem right now because every real estate industry group that I sit in on and that this conversation about 45X comes up basically comes to the same conclusion, which is that it's too expensive. that there's jobs that are going to be large enough that can basically handle it, particularly
But it's not-
the wage controls. But other than that, you can tell me, like you said, you're not seeing those new residential buildings, which is a massive problem. Fortunately, if the practice is broad enough and you get, a nice
Right.
lot of institutional jobs,
But
and
it's
such,
hurting our business.
100%. And gosh, it's almost like you wish that those conversations happened earlier on with the development community, because you could basically see this coming from a mile away.
I'm going to give you an example of it that is outside of New York City. And it all makes us think, right? So the show is about providing information to our fellow colleagues that we know forever. That's who tunes into our show. People know that Richard's on. They listen. They're on the train. They're going to listen. Of course, you the name Lobel really projects subject matter expert in the zoning world. You got an issue, you got a question, you need something answered. They may not answer it, but they're going to put you in the right direction. Hey, I can't answer this, but I can send you this way, right? So as part of New York State, in upstate New York, they have taken basically pastures and woods, they've cut them down, and they've put solar farms up. Mm-hmm. And a friend of mine was in that, he's a contractor, and he did 2 of them right off the bat. $1.5 million projects. Go in, cut the trees down, he levels it, he grades it, he puts in all the stanchions to hold up the panels, and they fence it to keep the animals and people away from it. And then the solar company comes in and sets all the panels. So they get 2 jobs, and they got 30 of them on the plate. They get to the 3rd job, they get the RFP, and the RFP now says prevailing wages. So he takes it, looks at it, it goes back to his old jobs. He says, we cleared 70 acres. This is the equipment we used. These are the operators we used. And mind you, an operator working an excavator, even at prevailing wage, doesn't make $18.
Right.
He's running a $500,000 piece of equipment for hours and hours and hours per day.
Right.
He's making substantial pay. So we're not saying that, he's making nothing. The bids were $1.5 million when he was doing it without prevailing wage. This particular gentleman, it's his family-run business. So it's his dad working, his sons, it's his cousins. It's just pretty much their own family. The bid went from $1.5 million to $2.6 million. When they took all the prevailing wages of all the subs,
Right.
the developer who backs these programs said, I'm out of the game.
Right.
He dumped 6 projects. He took the land, he put it back up for sale, and he sold it. Who didn't benefit? Right. You had a goal that you wanted to get green. You had a plan and a commitment to the city that you were going to get this power off the grid, right? And give it back to them, pumping it through their high-powered lines. And now you made this program, you created the benefit, but now it doesn't make sense on paper and pencil, so the developers abandon it.
That's the disconnect between, for example, the city, which is creating opportunity and trying to spur economic and residential development, and, for example, the state, which, in another example, you look at the MDL limitation on 12 FAR,
right,
and the fact that you need partners in Albany
to help you change that. Because the multiple dwelling law, a lot of people don't know it, is that the multiple dwelling is a New York State law,
correct,
but it only applies to city to population over 1 million.
Correct.
And New York City is the only one that has 1 million.
So the example you gave, this example, it's like at some point there was a community board meeting that I went to, and I was going in for a small rezoning. It was in Queens. And it was a turning point for me, because I went in, it was about 3 years ago, and I was in ULURP, and the owner was this guy, owned 2 lots together, 8,000 square feet. And from the beginning, I told him, we're going to have a problem here. I know this community board, they've got a very conservative outlook. They're not going to want to rezone and such. And when I went to that hearing, all of a sudden, the younger generation on the community board said, this looks like a great project. We need to rezone. It was from an existing R4 to an R6A. And everyone in the room was kind of like, was a little bit, there was a discussion. And then some of the older community board members were like, don't you remember in 2000, we downzoned this site and we downzoned this area to R4? And the younger generation in the community board said, yeah, that was over 20 years ago.
Right.
And we need the housing and we want this. And so they approved it and it got approved. And at that moment, which was like, I've been doing this for a little while now.
Couple of years.
Like that moment, I started feeling like there was a shift and a change, a turn, where all of a sudden I didn't feel like I was the villain, but I felt like a little bit like maybe I was the hero, because you're creating something, you're creating housing. And I think that it's like everybody knows now that you need more housing. It's like there's the secret is there's no secret anymore to the fact that there's a law of supply and demand, and if you're not creating new units and the population is the same or goes up, you're like housing prices just keep going up. And so everybody should be on board with this. Everybody should be on board with making the necessary changes to the legislation to allow for more housing to be created. We're doing it in the city, and City of Yes, I got to tell you, like, it's complex, it's dense, it's criticized and such, but the fact remains that city planning and the department did a lot here.
They took action.
Across the board, Sisto.
Across the board. They
But-
didn't sit back.
But if you don't get the right people and the right policies in place at the state, it's literally ends up being for nothing. We end up
Correct.
with all these great potential sites which end up never getting built. And so that's where we're at.
I'll share this with you. So we're doing a bunch of office to residential conversions. We have one right now that's under construction. I've been talking about it, and we're facing those challenges, right? And the challenges are as follows. Zoning is a non-issue. Zoning was straightforward. Multiple dwelling law, very difficult, because there's sections that could no way apply, like, hey, put some asbestos behind your kitchen pipes in the in the kitchen. And lack of flexibility. Right? And so we find ourselves that with the architect, we have become creative to understand how we can comply or make it better. Mm-hmm. That's, hey, you want this, but we could give you this, but this 3-hour wall with concrete is way better than this, but we need to construct it this way. Right? So there's places where there is interpretation, and the people that can make those decisions can make a better building, make a safer building, and not have to go and change every single law in the book. Right? But at the end of the day, if I tell you how many projects has come through for RFPs that get killed at some point, that when they go through the whole thing, it just hurts them. The size of the elevators, ripping everyone out, ripping the stairs out, this problem, that problem. And they all sound great. But the example I wanted to give you was your dad. Your dad always, I'll never forget this, that I'm always about people, right? Connecting. And your dad connected with everybody.
Oh, he's the best.
He was the greatest. And like your children said, he would go to the diner and he knew the name of the guy in the diner. He knew where he came from. He knew where he went on vacation. And he would ask him the greatest questions. And they weren't always personal. Sometimes he had a reason for it. And he would be in a little diner in Manhattan where he went every day, probably for his breakfast. And he would ask the waiter, so how's business? And he was asking that because in his mind, it was always about zoning. Where are the people living? Where are they shopping? Where are the kids going to school? Where do your kids go to school? Where do you live? How do they go? How do you do this? Oh, you travel here? Who brings your daughter to school? Who picks her up? Your father would ask him a million questions because he would ask me, and I had nothing to do with it. So you talk about, Andrew and I, Esposito from Apex Development Group, building charter schools. We talked about it. And he goes, yeah, they want more office to become residential. They want more people. SCA can't build the schools fast enough, but they cap the limit of licenses of charter schools. And if you have a charter school, he was explaining today on the last episode, is you have to be within that DOE district. And then you got to be, he goes, before you know it, you're in like a 3-block radius. Meanwhile, you got a license in New York State, in New York City, right? Because the license is for the state. So you did this part of the zoning to say we need a more affordable housing, right? We're doing that big project in Brooklyn with Bruno Frastacci and Fifth Avenue Committee, right? So here we are. We're putting all these units, 300 units. Most of those families are affordable housing with children.
Right.
Where are all of these kids going to school if you didn't let them put a charter school or you can't build it?
Right. Which is like when you talk about my dad, which is a perfect example, part of the inquiry when he's asking these questions is also at the end of the day, we all want a safe place to live. We all want opportunities for our kids. We all want educational opportunities. And it's possible to make it a win-win. It's possible that everyone can come out ahead, but the disconnect right now between, for example, policies that don't, liberalize conversion of office buildings, increase the opportunity for charter schools, put
small businesses.
It's all of it, and so the truth is, zoning is a great tool, the building code's a great tool, but it's depressing right now in a certain respect because, this is really the first time, Sisto, where if I speak to some of the larger developers, there's a little bit of cynicism.
Hesitancy. Yeah.
And where New York may not be the greatest place to develop, which makes me as a not just a third generation, but third generation into zoning and land use and real estate in this city.
It's disheartening.
It's very disheartening, and it doesn't have to be like that. I go to community board meetings and for fresh applications for food stores, and everyone's like, "You mean that your developer's gonna get extra square footage for residential? We're gonna get a fresh food store and all these things and get approved for these applications." So there's a lot of unity and interest in a lot of what we seek to do.
But I think that part of that problem is the way that message gets delivered to the developer. Mm-hmm. Because they'll call us on the entitlement side. So, sister, we have this piece of land. We never built in New York. We want to do this, this, and this. And we say, okay, well, you got to go to this book, right? And to them, they're not used to that, right? Because they came from out of town.
Right.
They would hire an attorney.
Houston.
Right. Or anywhere, right? Even if they were in upstate New York.
Right.
And they would go and say, hey, this is the highway. We want to build a Dollar General. There's 1 million of them getting built all over the suburbs, right? And you're on Route 209 on your way to New Paltz. And you go to the Tuesday night planning board. And they go, what do you want to build? We're going to build a 10,000 square foot Dollar General. And they look around each other and they say, does the town need a Dollar General? Where are you putting it? What's the traffic like? Blah, 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 blah. And they go, approved.
Right.
But here we go, oh, you're in an M1. It doesn't allow that use.
Right.
You need a guy like Richard Lobel.
Right.
And then Richard Lobel says, well, yeah, we can do it for you, but, you need a traffic study and you need this and you need that.
100%.
And then before they know it, just to get it rolling, they're going to spend an enormous amount of money where the truth of the matter is the developer's money is as good anywhere outside of New York City as it is here. So we see the expansion in Westchester, everywhere along the northern Westchester line, Mount Vernon, New Rochelle. They're building huge buildings because those towns said, okay, you don't want to build it there? Come build it here. White Plains will be more than happy for you to put them up on the train line. New Rochelle will be more than happy to have it. Mount Vernon, we don't have any of that, but we'll take it. You could get to Manhattan in 40 minutes from here. Absolutely. So their mindset, in a lot of ways, is ahead of New York City.
100%. And I had an opportunity a few weeks ago to interview Francis Greenberger from Time Equities for a kind of a roundtable. And he told a story about 1000M, which is on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And Francis, very experienced in terms of both co-ops as well as development in the city of New York. he went to Chicago and went to a meeting, which was the equivalent of the city council. And there was an issue as far as his address was concerned because the site was located within a historic area, which would necessitate far more complications in terms of planning, zoning, development, site planning, etc. And what they did was they go to a meeting and they go, "Yeah, we're going to move the boundary."
Just like that.
Just like that. And like to see him
Pro-development.
tell that story when you and I both know that if you
That would never
basically
happen.
like, in the city of New York, like are you kidding me? Like if you wanted to fight a historic district boundary in the city, I've done it. Like you're in for years and years and forget about cost, whether or not you even make it. The disparity between that.
Right.
So like
And I think developers have latched on that if they're developers, they can build anywhere. If you build in New York City or you build in Philly or you build in DC or you build in New Rochelle, the contractor is the contractor. It's still a foundation. It's still a building. It's still got elevators. It's still got stairs.
Yep.
It's still got a code.
Right.
It is what it is. So as first of all, I always thank you, Richard, for taking your time.
Absolute pleasure.
You know, time to me, what I really appreciate about the show is all my guests take time out of their busy day to come on to the show to give our audience and our colleagues a little bit about the professionals and the subject matter experts in their field about what's happening. And that's really what this show is about. So as you know, we always end the show, Andrew Peters, Curry and Brown, looking forward, right?
Right.
You were here last year.
Sure.
We talked a little bit about office to residential. And I think, if I recall correctly, you were right on about how there's a lot of fluff and there's still a lot of work to be done with the multiple dwelling law and initiatives to convince developers to do them. So as we look forward, we look at this last phase of the housing and the city of Yes.
Sure.
Give me one piece that you think will be the biggest positive out of it if you had to forecast it.
So when I look at City of Yes right now, and first of all, we have to be careful, of course, because housing opportunity is not passed yet. It's going to be
it's
leaving
proposed.
city planning, and it's going to go to the council. There's going to be some massive changes because you already know that council members in downtown Brooklyn feel differently from council members in
wherever.
Eastern Queens,
Right.
where parking is at a premium and such.
Right.
But I do think that to listen to Dan Garodnick, the chair of city planning, describe it, the idea is to ask everyone to share a little bit of the burden, to allow a little bit more
Compromise.
Right. And so basically like you've got accessory dwelling units now on in single and two family buildings. You can, make your garage into a mother-in-law apartment or something like that. There's zoning on commercial thoroughfares where you're going to get a little bit of extra FAR, the opportunity to bump up your residential above a commercial ground floor. The opportunity in certain, if you're close to transit to get additional square footage.
Which we always talked about.
100%. The opportunity
Wide streets and transit need more FAR.
Absolutely. You're looking, when we look at streets, these long-standing wide streets that are a block from a subway and are zone R32 allow for 3-story residential. It doesn't make any sense.
Crazy.
So I think that City of Yes is going to allow for a lot of this smaller as of right development to take hold, and that's going to happen slowly. But as far as the big impacts are concerned, yes, there are going to be jobs now which are going to be easier to get through. The removal of parking requirements
Right.
to a large extent in higher density developments is going to be a really important thing. But they gave you the tools, and there's a great toolbox.
But we need the developers to put it on pencil and paper, make it
latch
happen.
on and to do that. And it's going to take everybody doing it. You can't ignore creating more housing and more affordable housing because,
it's crazy.
You can't walk around the city and see what's happened and see people sleeping on the streets and not in some respect say to
Feel
yourself,
like, do I have a role in this?
that's the point. And so I do think we've got some great tools. We just need people to start utilizing them. But I thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's fantastic as always.
Richie, thank you.
All right, Sisto.